Documentary you are about to see is an accumulation of 20 years of extensive research. In my many hikes across the mountain, I have found fragments of past items and localities, and then I did the research to put them in a proper context with the physical evidence. The pictures you will see today came from the many archives in our area. The maps came from my own collection. So I would ask you to sit back and relax and take that trek across the Mount Tom Range. The Mount Tom Range is a beautiful green oasis located in a sea of humanity and is located between the towns of East Hampton and Holyoke. The mountain range is bordered on the north and the east by the Connecticut River, on the south by the Oak County line, and then on Route 141 and East Street in East Hampton. It contains about 7.5 square miles of property. There are 7 significant peaks on the range. Beginning on the south, we have Mount Tom at 1,230 feet, and then Dead Top at 1,100 feet, and then Mount Minus at 1,100 feet. Mount Minus was later renamed Whiting Peak. Here the ridge drops down into the Free Orchard Valley and reemerges on the other side as Goat Peak at 800 feet, and then Dry Knoll as 810 feet, and finally Mount Nonotuck at 830 foot. Here the ridge drops down into the Connecticut River and reemerges on the other side as Mount Holyoke. The last peak is Little Mount Tom. Even though it's only 600 feet high, it creates a drainage valley of Trout Brook. The Free Orchard Valley is drained by Old 100th Brook, now known as Cascade Creek, and here they meet in the swamp and then off through Sebastian Inland's Mill Pond and into the Connecticut River. The western side of the range is made up of the sheer basalt cliffs. Basalt being a very hard, fine-grade igneous rock used primarily in road construction. Basalt is a primary backbone of the entire range. An igneous rock is formed by the solidification of molten lava. It all starts in about 1653, when the inhabitants of Springfield petitioned the General Court of Massachusetts for permission to form another plantation north of Springfield. The request was granted and would be carried out by groups of men on each side of the Connecticut River, now known as the Connecticut River. On the east bank was Captain Elijah Holyoke and his contingent of men. On the west bank was Captain Roland Thomas and his contingent of men. Both groups started up the river through what is today Chicopee, West Springfield, Holyoke, South Hadley, and North Hampton. When they reached a gap between the two mountains, they held a conversation across the river, and each decided to take the mountain to their back in their own name. So today we have Mount Holyoke on the east bank and Mount Thomas on the west bank. These men went on up the river to form the town of Nonotuck, which later became Northampton. Over the next few decades, the mountain was referred to only as the Great Hill or the Great Mountain. It would be 1736 before the records of Northampton called the mountain by name. But by then it had been shortened to just Tom. What happened to the original name of Thomas will remain one of the mountain's mysteries. We now fast forward to 1861, when 2 men by the names of William Street and Hiram Farnham leased 10 acres of land on the very summit of Mount Nonotuck, shown here as the dark block in the center of the map. Here they set about building a summer resort hotel, roadways, and picnic groves. They quickly finished the task. On July 4th, 1861, with great fanfare, the little building was dedicated the Erie House, meaning Eagle's Nest. Hundreds of people made their way to the hotel that day to hear the great orators of the day, enjoy the cornet band, and many other festivities. The first house was only 22 by 26 feet. It contained 5 guest rooms, as well as an observation deck, parlors for the ladies, dining room, kitchen, and offices. The rooms were quickly taken at $6 a week, room and board. Shortly after opening, Mr. Farnham took leave of the operation. So William Street, showed here in his signature bowler hat, went on to a 40-year career as a hotel proprietor. He continued to enlarge and improve his hotel complex. In 1872, the house had doubled in size, which added another 5 or 6 guest rooms and a new veranda. The room rent is now $7 a week, room and board, and the hotel continues its growth process. By 1879, the hotel is now a 30 guest room complex, complete with all the amenities for comfort and style, such as ladies' tea and men's smoking parlors, kitchen, dining room, and offices. And the rent is now $8 a week, room and board. The exterior of the building had these promenades extending from 3 sides of the building. We see many patrons on a promenade. We will go up to this window and take a look at the north promenade. We see it coming diagonally in front of the building here and then going due north about 100 feet. The promenades were built up on these spindly legs that held them above the treetops for spectacular viewing of the valley below. We will now go to the south promenade and look back towards the hotel. We see a silhouette view of the hotel with the front promenade extending out about 30 feet from the front of the hotel. We also see the Connecticut River in the valley winding its way toward Long Island Sound. We are only seeing half of this promenade. We will go up to this window and take a look at the other half of the promenade. We see that this promenade was several hundred feet in length, and we see a group of patrons enjoying a late afternoon stroll along the promenade. The unique aspect of this promenade was that at its end it had a staircase that went down to this platform, and from this platform a mother or father could strap their children in these swings hanging from the poles. Then by going on down and taking a walking pole and walking in a very small circle, these children on swing in gigantic arcs. They could remove the kids and return to the hotel by a land path, or when the parents had tired, turning the path to the left and continue on down to the pavilion for some refreshments. The pavilion was a 40 by 50 foot building of which we have no pictures. The building would hold several hundred people and was a place where dancing to an orchestra was common. Also where company picnics, concerts, and parties were held. Mr. Street's stable was beneath the pavilion. This fact did not cause any concern for the patrons because horses, after all, were the only form of transportation in those days. Mr. Street was also known for his dining fare. This picture dates to about 1880. The dining room would seat about 80 guests, and the menu featured a 7-course meal, both hot or cold, for the supreme price of 50 cents. Although that was cheaper meals, this was a signature meal of the Erie House. There had been a lot written about young couples taking the carriage ride to the Erie House for an evening and dining and dancing, and then taking that romantic moonlit carriage ride back home. This view is from the Erie House down to Mountown Junction train station. In about 1885, Mr. Street started talking of building an inclined railway from Mountown Junction train station to the summit, while at the same time building a new and larger hotel. By 1895, he had completed the rail bed to the summit and now concentrated on his new hotel. This is a 1910 picture of his new hotel foundation. The new hotel would be 3 stories of stone and 1 of steel. Had he been allowed to finish it, or at least add a platform to it, the trolley would have come up the mountain, across the trestle, and into the building at this level. But this was not to be, because catastrophe was about to happen. It's April 13th, 1901. Mr. Street walked to the hotel from Holyoke as he had many times in the past to complete work in preparation for opening day. Only this time he found that several of his horses had died since his last trip. As he was not enough dirt on the summit to bury the animals, he decided to cremate them. He built a funeral pyre and set the fire to do its job. He retired for the night, believing the fire had extinguished itself, only to be awakened at some time later to the roar of a devastating fire. He quickly discovered that the fire had in fact rekindled and already consumed pavilion and stable, and had worked its way up the mountain to the hotel, which by this time was engulfed in flames. Despite his single-handed effort, the Erie house burned to the ground. It is obvious that he was underinsured. He did not have money enough to rebuild the present hotel or to continue building his new hotel, so he salvaged what he could and abandoned his mountain. This picture was taken sometime after the fire. We can still see the foundation, walls with several doorways. This huge column of rocks coming across in front is no doubt the large chimney or fireplace that once heated the great hotel. What we see on the mountain today. On the backside of the mountain is this foundation rubble of the pavilion and stable. The combination of the two make up the pavilion, and the smaller room underneath the stable with this large doorway is the stable. As you can see, they were a complete loss. On the crest of the mountain, we see this last remaining section of the original Erie House foundation. Mr. Street destroyed the rest so that the house could not be rebuilt. This is an outside view of the new hotel that he was building and shows just how massive the hotel was going to be. It appeared much like a medieval fortress. This is the inside view of the foundation. It's about the same as we saw in the earlier 1910 picture, except that the vandals have thrown off about a foot of material in the past 100 years. We are now on the other end of the mountain, and we'll look at some of the great mountain water supplies. We will start with the small intake reservoir. This little reservoir was completed and went online in 1884. It had a dam length of 171 feet and was 15 feet in height. Its outlet emptied directly into the Holyoke water system. It was so successful that in 1888 construction started on the much larger Whiting Street Reservoir. This reservoir would have a dam length of 1,723 feet and be 20 feet in height. The reservoir went online in 1890. This is a colorized glass plate picture of about 1885. It shows a beautiful reflective view of the intake reservoir, complete with gatehouse. Today this area is hard to find, as the gatehouse and water are gone, and the entire area is now reforested. This is a 1928 picture of the Whiting Street Reservoir and Dam. This picture was taken 1 year before the addition of a 20-foot dirt berm on the downstream side of the dam. This picture also shows a nice silhouette of Little Mount Tom. I might add that Little Mount Tom was the only active volcano on the range, and the lava flow was southeast towards Holyoke. We will now talk about the first inclined railway on the range. It was in East Hampton, at the intersection of Mountain Road and Holyoke Street in East Hampton. It was known as the George Colton Quarry. It went into operation in 1895. The tracks ran up the mountain, under Upper Flats Road, and into the Upper Ballast Talus Fields, where the cars would be loaded with talus and cabled back down the mountain. We can see the dual narrow gauge tracks coming down the mountain and into the building. The talus would be crushed into whatever size stone needed, and mule-drawn carts like the one in the foreground would be used to distribute the stone wherever needed in the area. In 1903, when the reservation come along, the property line went just in front of the mules, took in the building, and went on up the mountain. The Reservation Commission gave Mr. Colton all the time he needed to shut down his business and remove the equipment in a businesslike manner. Mr. Colton completed the task in several years. Only the large concrete slab that the crusher itself once sat upon can be found today. We will now talk about this mountain entrepreneur, William Stiles Loomis. He was a Civil War veteran, the past publisher of the Holyoke Transcript newspaper, and also a real estate developer. He owned property in the highlands of Holyoke. In his travels around the country, he had been fascinated by the new trolley systems he had seen. When he returned to Holyoke, he started investing heavily in the fledgling Holyoke Street Railway. When he had enough stock to become the president, he quickly had tracks laid to his property in the highlands, and this vastly increased his fortune. Mr. Loomis also saw the value of mountain property. So in 1893, he purchased 100 acres right on the very summit of Mount Tom. The following year, he purchased 500 plus acres from the Whiting Street estate. This now gave him property from the Connecticut River all the way to the summit. He quickly transferred it to his new company, the Mount Tom Railroad Company. Also in his travels, he saw the profits made by the new trolley parks, and he set about to create his own. In the spring of 1895, in a beautiful valley below the reservoir, he opened Mountain Park. The first construction was this combination pavilion, restaurant, and trolley stop building. The park now provided a destination to get out of the sweltering city. You will note in the background we have a silhouette of Little Mount Tom. And if you look real close, you will see on its summit a 3-story observation tower. This tower provided unparalleled views of the entire Connecticut River Valley and was enjoyed by the public. This outdoor theater stage was also an original idea. It was erected on this high platform. A mixture of plays, vaudeville, and concert were made available to the public. By the looks of this standing room crowd, the public responded. During the late summer, it must have been hot with people dressed in wool suits and or long dresses. It's 1901, and the old elevated theatrical stage was replaced with this new 1,800-seat building. Although it is an open-air building, it was well received by the public. The afternoon performances were fantastic, but at night, when the stage lights were turned on, every flying creature in Western Mass also attended the performance. But the public enjoyed the performances so much that the following year the building was replaced with this new enclosed casino. Great crowds continued to patronize the casino. From 1902 to 1911, theater, vaudeville, and concerts shared the stage. 1912 to 1924, the new movies, silent and talkies, were the rage. 1925 to 1935, theater took top billing again. In 1935, the casino was remodeled and now appeared like this. The casino continued its popularity. From 1935 to 1940, the WPA was a Works Progress Administration, took over the operation of the casino and produced some wonderful theater. 1941 to 1963 saw the Valley Players bring off-Broadway and summer stock theater to the area. In 1963 to 1965, the Mount Tom Players continued to work, but theater attendance was waning, and the last curtain call of 1965 season the casino closed, and shortly thereafter the building was demolished. All that can be found today is this old ticket booth, but it is well hidden because the forest has reclaimed the entire area. In 1929, the new north and south entrance gates from Route 5 were opened. This is the beautiful North Gate. The gates were a welcome addition for the many new drivers going to and from the park. It's now about 1933, and the Midway is changing. We still see the trolley as a primary mode of public transportation. In the foreground is the Stardust Ballroom and Pavilion, built in 1907. It was the place where many of the country's biggest name bands played for the dancing enjoyment of the local population. Further down the Midway, we see the Carousel Building, the airplane ride, as well as the new roller coaster and arcade row. Now into the 1940s, people are starting to line up for the roller coaster, and Arcade Row is becoming busy. Fast forward again to the early 50s. A large crowd can be seen coming and going from the Midway. We now see buses as a means of public transportation. We also see the Stardust Ballroom. Unfortunately, the ballroom burned to the ground in 1971 and was never rebuilt. Then in late 1952, Mountain Park is sold. The Mountown Railroad Company claim they have been losing money. The park is sold to the Collins brothers of Medford, Mass., who have a different view concerning the operation of an amusement park. They give everything in the park a fresh and bright coat of paint. The park takes on a new and exciting look of gaiety, and immediately the crowds return and revenues climb. The satellite ride and others can be seen in the background. Here is a miniature 18-hole golf course, which was so popular from the 1920s through to the park's closing. In its beginning, it was the answer to the Depression blues and remained popular all the way to the closing. Here is the ride that everybody enjoyed, the beautiful Mountain Park Ferris wheel. On the right, we see the new Sky Ride, which would take you above the treetops and 700 feet down the Midway to Animal Land, where the children could enjoy the animal petting zoo. In the background of this picture, we see the miniature train depot. It was the little train that ultimately caused the demise of Mountain Park. It seems that there had been several deaths in the park, the last one on the train when it derailed, tipped over, and killed a young girl. The park's liability insurance skyrocketed and became too expensive for the park to continue. All rides in the park were sold to parks around the world, except the carousel that was housed in this building. A group of Holyoke businessmen got together and raised through donations enough money to purchase it. The carousel was moved to a similar building at Heritage State Park in downtown Holyoke, where it can still be ridden today. I recommend that we all take the opportunity to feel young again and ride the carousel. What we see at Mountain Park today. On the right, the Whip Building, and behind it, the Carousel Building, and on the left, the Popcorn Cotton Candy Building. As this and the next several pictures were taken in 1995, these buildings today have all burned or have collapsed. Again, on the right, the Carousel Building, behind it, the Dodgem Car Building, and on the left, the Coin Toss Kiosk Building. They are all gone now. Here we see Arcade Row as it slowly slips into rubble. Today, most of these buildings have been burned or flattened by neglect and the snow load. These stairs would have taken you from the Midway up and into the Stardust Ballroom. Today, they take you only to a memory. Today, the beautiful old North Gate can only be seen during the winter months, as the forest has reclaimed the entire area. Let's now go back to 1896. Mountain Park is flourishing. Mr. Loomis sets his eyes towards the summit and quickly has a mountain surveyed for a trolley route from Mountain Park to the summit. And of course a location for a mountain house. Within 2 weeks after receiving the survey, he begins construction of an inclined railway. This 1896 picture shows a drilling and blasting crew posing for a picture while blasting through the largest ledge of rocks on the inclined railroad. Early in 1897, at that same ledge of rocks, we now have a trolley track system. We can now start transportation of construction materials for the first Summit House. With the railway in place and work started on the Summit House, we still need one more item, and that is a water supply. The mountain has always had a small reservoir near its summit, so Mr. Loomis only had to put his work crew to enlarging the dam. From the reservoir, it would be piped hill and dale over to the pumping station, and from there it would be pumped up to the summit houses. This is how the Summit Reservoir appears today. It is only a small duck pond, but with a very nice straight dam. From here the water goes to the pump house. This is a 1917 picture of the pump house, which was constructed of natural stone. complete with tin roof and door. It contained the electric pump that pushed the water up the mountain to the holding tanks beneath the summit houses. The young man in the picture is unknown, so will remain another Mount Tom mystery. How the pump house appears today. It's just camouflage in the woods, its tin roof, door, and piping long gone to a World War II scrap drive. So we now have an inclined railway, a trolley system, a water system, and the first summit house almost completed. So let's take a ride on the inclined trolley. We start our ride on an old open trolley car that's coming up from Mountain Park towards the lower station. You would come up the tracks from Mountain Park, disembark onto the platform, where you would purchase your 25-cent round-trip ticket and enter the station. You would board one of the two incline trolley cars. They were the Rowland Thomas and the Elijah Holyoke car. Here we see the Elijah Holyoke car leaving the station. Note the slanted floors and seats. They will soon level out as the car starts up the incline for the 7-8 minute ride to the summit. We are now above the passing tracks, looking down the mountain towards the lower station. The way the system worked, there was two cars that operated on a single set of tracks. They were each attached to one end of a single cable. The cable went up and around this 8-foot cable pulley located behind the upper station. This created a situation where one car went up, the other had to go down, always passing at exactly the same place on the passing tracks. Here we see the two cars having just passed one another. This is the only curve on the inclined railway, just above the ledge of rocks we saw earlier. In the background we can see the upper station, and way off to the left, if we look closely, we'll see the first summit house. So that dates this picture about 1897. This picture was taken from the observation tower on Little Mount Tom. We see the entire inclined railway from the lower station up to the passing track, where we see the cars passing each other, and finally the upper station up on the summit. And then again, just off to the left, we have the first summit house. This is the upper station as taken from the observation tower of the first mountain house. The car would have come up the mountain into the station. You got off the trolley and walked across this trestle and along this common walkway over and into the first summit house. It's June 23, 1897. The house opens with great fanfare. The summit house would only be a day trip, as there was no overnight accommodations. I'd prefer to call this house a pavilion because of its openness. None of these large archways here were closed. In the basement, we had a kitchen. On the first floor, we had a small lunchroom. On the second floor, there was a small dance hall. And on the top, there was a small enclosed observation deck. The house was well received and people flocked to it. In fact, the first year was so successful that during the winter, they enlarged the observation deck out to the chimney, as seen in this picture. I like this picture because it shows some of the huge crowds that made their way to the summit for the view and the fresh mountain air. This little provisions trolley was used to carry provisions from the upper station to the basement of the summit house and traveled on its own set of tracks. In this picture it appears that the two men are standing on a staircase, but actually it's the tracks for the provision car, which would be stored in the kitchen. It's June 19, 1899. Our 25th president, William McKinley, and his wife pay a visit to the area. The president was in Holyoke as a guest of William Whiting and spent the afternoon at the summit. The president proclaimed the view to be one of the very best mountain views in the world. It's now October 8th, 1900. It's 9 o'clock in the evening. Only the staff were on duty. They had just completed cleaning the chimney flue and restarted the fire. The staff went about their chores. Then something went drastically wrong. a fire broke out in the basement ceiling between the floors, and despite all their efforts, the house burned to the ground. The executive board immediately went into session and voted to rebuild the house. And just 30 days later, this temporary construction shed was completed. It would provide storage space for the few items that was salvaged from the fire and protection for the construction equipment. Then, just 7 months later, on May 15, 1901, this beautiful new Summit house opened. It was built on the same footprint as the first, but was much taller. The kitchen was still in the basement, but now on the first floor we had a very elegant restaurant known as the Tapa Tom. On the second floor we had a very nice ballroom complete with raised orchestra stage for very elegant dancing. Then we had an open observation deck for viewing. Behind that we had a conference deck, and then there was a large enclosed observation deck. And then if you really was in the know, you could get up to the VIP deck here, and it was all capped off by a 12-foot gold leaf dome. This house was a place to be. It was a place to be seen. This pavilion was located on the south side of the second house. I like to refer to it as a ladies' tea house because a lot of people brought their picnic baskets to the summit instead of purchasing food in the dining room. The ladies would gather in the tea house to have their tea, knit, and gossip, while their menfolk were off in the woods. Then when it was time for lunch, the ladies would spread out their picnic and the family would gather to eat while enjoying the cool breeze and a fantastic view of the valley. I like this aerial view of the house because it shows how majestically the house stood upon the crest of the mountain. We will fast forward to May 2nd, 1929. It's only 6 p.m. and many guests are still in the house. It is believed that an ember came out of the chimney, crossed over the dome, and came to rest in this southwest corner of the unused roof. Here it took hold in some wind-blown refuge. By the time the fire was discovered, it had already got a good start. Despite all the efforts of the staff and guests, the great house burned to the ground. The ironic part is that the firefighting system that had been tested a month earlier failed to operate when needed the most. This is the blaze that is known as the torch in the sky because it was viewed from so many miles around. The executive board went into session and voted to rebuild a temporary house. Just 30 days later, on June 30th, 1901, the third house opened. It is obvious that the days of opulence and grandeur were gone, and this house showed it. It was very unattractive, you might even say ugly. It was built just north of the other houses and sat upon concrete pillars. It was a steel-framed building with corrugated metal siding. There was nothing on the first and second floors, and on the roof was a small 10-foot observation tower. It had nothing going for it except the view. It was not really accepted because people were buying more cars and getting further away from home, and besides, mountain houses were waning in popularity. But it did survive until October 12, 1936, when the Holyoke Street Railway Company stopped all trolley car service, including the Summit service. The house was then left to the vandals of the day. In 1939, the railway company decided to scrap the house, the cars, and the incline line. This is an aerial view showing the demolition of the third house. The siding has already been removed. The sad part is that the siding had tar paper glued to each side of it and could not be scrapped. And as we did not have conservation laws in those days, the siding was thrown over the side, and for the next 65 years the wind has distributed it over most of the mountain. The building and eventually the tracks were removed. This picture shows the relationship to the first and second house foundation that we see here. This small rock building, I might add, is still in use today at the summit. This is the Elijah Holyoke car in the upper station awaiting its demise, and from the looks of its deterioration, it could not come too soon. The building survived until 1941, when it was burned by vandals. After the removal of the tracks, these men went about the task of removing the hundreds of railroad ties. Many were salvaged, many were burned, but the rest were thrown over the side where they can still be seen today. The roadbed stayed in this very rough condition until it was finally paved in 1971. Now let's look at what's on the mountain today. This wall is still intact and is used as part of the transmitter building, and it was constructed in 1897. The stairway would have taken you from the common walkway down onto the path to the ladies' tea house. This stairway would have taken you from the common walkway up and into the first and second houses. Today, it provides only a place to sit and enjoy the view. This walkway was built along the cliffs in 1897. Part of it has collapsed in the 1940s, but it still has today the same fantastic view that it had when built. The stairway we saw earlier is down the other end here past the trees. These concrete pillars once supported the third summit house, and if we look real close right up here in the trees, we will see these stairways that would have taken you from the common walkway up and into the third summit house. Today, they provide just a place for weary hikers to catch their breath. The last artifact on the summit is this large steel frame that once supported the 8-foot pulley that served as a fulcrum for the cable connecting the inclined cars. Why the scrapmen did not take it will remain another Mount Tom mystery. We are now going to the other end of the mountain, but we'll return here shortly. The Mount Tom State Reservation, shown here in yellow, was created by an act of the legislature in 1903. The bill was then sent to both Hanover and Hampshire counties for referendum vote and was quickly passed. The first endeavor for the commission was to purchase the 81 parcels of land that would make up the 1,800-acre reservation, and this would take several years to complete. While this was taking place, the reservation staff set about developing a road system through the reservation. The Upper Flats Road had been in existence for centuries. It was merely straightened and continued on down to Mount Tom Junction. The first road from Route 5, or the Springfield Road, was on a little slip of land here that came in, connected Mom and Pop Woods and quarry roads until it got up to the Free Orchard. The next road was this road here, created in 1911. This road created the dam created Lake Bray, and went off to Route 5. The last road was in 1922. That was the East Hampton Road that came from the Free Orchard down to East Street in East Hampton. This now gives us the north, south, east, and west entrance and exit to the reservation. In the mid-1930s, this original road here was abandoned. In the mid-1940s, this road here from Nonotuck down to Mount Tom Junction was abandoned. And in 1982, this road down into East Hampton was abandoned. So that left us the south and the east entrance and exits to the reservation. The first construction on the reservation was this fire tower, shown under construction on Goat Peak in 1912. When completed, it would be 3 stories high and would remain in continuous use 24/7 until 1924, when it was struck by lightning and destroyed, and was never rebuilt. This new 35-foot steel tower was erected on Goat Peak in 1928. This tower was never used as a fire tower, but it has become one of the finest viewing and birdwatching towers in western Massachusetts, especially during hawk migration season. This stone crusher is located on Christopher Clark Road and was built in 1928 by the Civilian Works Administration of Chicopee. These boys were better known as the CWA, and they were the predecessors of the Civilian Conservation Corps, also known as the CCC. The crusher had a large wooden hopper on top. The trucks loaded with basalt talus would back up the slope and dump the talus into the hopper. The crusher was driven by a belt off the rear wheels of a truck parked up here on the flats, and a truck would park underneath the discharge chute here, and the stone would be distributed around the reservation wherever needed. The crusher was used by the CWA from 1928 to 1933 when it was turned over to the CCC boys, who used it until 1939 when they too left the reservation. Continuing on Christopher Clark Road, we come to this beautiful entrance gate. It was completed in 1928 by the same Civilian Works Administration crew. It was constructed of natural fieldstone and was complete with granite globes on each pier. These globes are signature to all reservation gates. The workmen must have been hot and thirsty the day they completed this gate, so the whole crew walked across the road for a cool drink at the Green Candle Inn. At the time, it was locally known as just the filling station on the mountain. But note the narrow width of the still dirt Route 141. We know the restaurant today as Harvest Valley Restaurant and most recently as the new Aura Restaurant. We have the 1173rd Company of the Civilian Conservation Corps to thank for most of the entities on the reservation, including but not limited to this stone house, which was located in the free orchard section of the reservation. The CCC boys started construction in 1936 and completed it in 1938. It originally served as a shelter for patrons during inclement weather. It later became the reservation headquarters. Then in 1994, it was transformed into a seasonal state reservation visitor center. This is the Robert S. Cole Museum. The CCC boys started construction in 1940. It was completed a year later by the reservation staff. It served as a museum of natural history until 1988, when due to financial constraints, they could no longer afford a curator and the museum closed. 1995, the building was slated for demolition, but a lot of lobbying, the museum was saved and became the pump house for the new reservation water system. Note the wavy board construction, which is a signature of the CCC. This log cabin originally sat on a knoll in Free Orchard. It was built for the Boy Scouts by the Lions Club of Holyoke in about 1932. In 1938, the reservation purchased the cabin and the CCC boys moved it to the shore of Lake Bray, where it became a warming lodge for skiers using the new ski trails built by the CCC boys. I might add the trails were the first ski runs on the entire Mount Tom range. The cabin also provided a warm shelter for the many people skating on Lake Bray. The cabin was in use until 1970. The new concrete warming house was opened in 1970. The old log cabin can still be seen here over underneath the trees and was finally demolished in 1980. This picture shows a typical skating crowd that used Lake Bray from 1930s through the 1980s. In 1990, the state took over operation of the park and skating slowly tapered off. Today, we see very few skaters. This reflective view across Lake Bray from Pine Point is a summer version of the previous picture. This view up the valley of Trout Brook. Mount Tom is down on the very end here. It was taken from the dam at Lake Bray. What makes it so special is that there are no antennas along the mountain ridge. The picture is taken from Mount Nonotuck parking lot. The parking lot was completed in 1940. The view is toward the Connecticut River Oxbow, Mount Tom Junction, and Northampton. The lot is also a jumping off place for the Erie House ruins. You can see that the reservation took up a great deal of our mountain, but there was another purchase that would be much larger. Most of the entire mountain belonged to the city of Northampton, even though it was separated by East Hampton. All the residents, farmers, and industrial people on the mountain paid their taxes to the Northampton, as most good citizens do. But for their tax dollars, they received nothing in return. No police, fire, roads, water, or sewer services from Northampton. It seems that they were just too far away. Most of the services were provided by Holyoke. From the turn of the century, the many mountain inhabitants petitioned the legislature for annexation to Holyoke. Northampton would have no part of it because they would lose some of their tax base. Finally, on June 9, 1909, the state legislature passed a bill authorizing the annexation of the mountain to Holyoke. Holyoke gained 5.44 square miles of new property, And for that, they paid the city of Northampton $52,000. A super bargain, even in those days. No talk of the mountain would be complete without this item, and that is Kenilworth Castle. The castle was built on a man-made knoll at the head of Northampton Street in Holyoke. It was built in 1883-84 by a Holyoke industrialist, Edward Taft. He had traveled the world over, and the castle was modeled after some of the castles he had seen in Europe. It had beautiful wood-paneled walls, frescoed ceiling, a large great room off the carriage portico. It was actually built as a summer home. Unfortunately, Mr. Taft died shortly after moving into the castle. Upon his death, the castle went to his daughter, Lucretia, who shortly thereafter married William Flagg. The young couple moved into the castle. The young couple spent their entire lives there, with Mr. Flagg the first to die. When Lucretia died in 1957, the castle came under the control of Hadley Falls Trust Company, who promptly sold all the furniture and fixtures at numerous estate sales. The largest piece to stay local was a great break front from the dining room. It went to the Yankee Peddler restaurant in Holyoke, where it can still be seen today, used as a back bar. What to do with the building came next. There was talk of it becoming a museum, but in the end the Holyoke Water Power Company purchased the building and stating they were going to use it for offices. But after receiving the deed, they called in the Dean of Architecture of MIT College, who evaluated the castle. In his report, he found that the castle had no historical value and in fact was structurally unsound. So with his name on that document, the castle was demolished, and a touch of antiquity left our mountain forever. Nothing was done with the property until about 1970, when it was finally sold to a real estate developer who built Kenilworth Apartments on the same spot where the castle once stood. As we stand here on Northampton Street, looking at the castle, we would be unable to see the castle today or the apartments that are there now, because the forest has retaken this entire area. The only thing I could find reminiscent of Kenilworth Castle was this gate post right here and a little piece of the fence. I worked several hours on a very gloomy day trimming away the brush to get this picture. As you can see, the post is not in very good shape, so it will not be many years before it too disappears. We have talked about the reservation here in yellow, Mountain Park in red, so let's finish the summit shown in blue. In 1942, the Mount Tom Railroad Company sold the summit to the Hamden, Hampshire Corporation, who owned WHYN Radio. They promptly moved their transmitter to the summit and vastly increased their listening area. By 1947, there were 3 separate radio transmitters, all transmitting simultaneously at the summit. In 1952, television comes to the area, and WHYN went on the air as WHYN TV Channel 55. Then in 1955, in the process of increasing their power, it changed to the one we still know today, WGGB TV Channel 40. In 1962, Hamden, Hampshire Corporation sold the summit to Geigenet Publishing Company of Maine. They have a different view concerning ownership of a mountain top, and they develop an antenna farm. This picture shows that today there are many, many different antenna systems, all operating simultaneously from the summit. Everything from giant microwave receivers to small mom-and-pop taxi radios. You might say that today the communications highway travels directly over the summit of Mount Tom. We will now discuss a very sad part of our mountain history. World War II is over. Our soldiers are getting home by whatever means available. A B-17 bomber that had been converted to passenger service left Europe with 25 young servicemen on board, headed for home. With a stop in Goose Bay, Labrador for fuel, and Westover Field in Chicopee, where 4 of the young men would end their journey. The rest were to continue to Long Island for their separation discharges. Here we are again at the same rock cut we saw the men blasting and the new trolley tracks. But now this area takes on a more sinister note. We fast forward to July 9th, 1946. While circling the area to land at Westover, the huge bomber slams into the mountain about 400 yards to the right of this picture. The plane begins to break apart as it grinds along the rocky outcropping before dumping into this narrow roadway. The heavy motors and cockpit dump out the other side and continue rolling down the mountain. The newspaper of the following day tells the sad story. All 25 young men die in that horrific crash. Nothing was done at the time to memorialize them. Then in 1996, a gentleman by the name of Norm Cody, late of Northampton, takes up the cause to build a memorial in their honor. He enlists a veteran agent from Northampton, East Hampton, and Holyoke, and many other interested citizens, and together we set about the task of building a memorial. The memorial is built at the crash site and starts at the edge of the service road that runs to the summit. It consists of a pathway through a field of 25 white birch, each one planted in living memory of a young man who died. The pathway comes up the hill and enters on what we call the patio area. The pathway enters the patio area on the right and follows a circular rising rock wall around to the memorial stone. The view from the memorial patio is towards Westover Field, the plane's original destination. On July 6, 1996, the 50th anniversary, a dedication was held with 17 of the original 25 families in attendance. The memorial stone is black India marble. It contains a picture of the aircraft, the insignias of the branches of service, a one-sentence history, the names, rank, and home state of each of the men that died. On the bottom is a short prayer. This picture was taken a day after the memorial service, as the 25 red roses are still bright and laying at the base of the stone. The area in the background, enclosed by the orange tape, is one of the 4 burn areas where the giant motors came to rest. They burned with such fury that the heat generated has caused the ground to remain perfectly sterile for about 57 years. The only area left is the green area here in the center of the map. Again, this was owned by the Mount Tom Railroad Company. They had operated a small quarry there since 1900. The basalt rock was used in building their many miles of trolley lines. The area had been offered for sale many times, but it would be 1952 before the Daniel O'Connell and Sons Construction Company of Holyoke finally purchased the property. The Daniel O'Connell Company reopened the quarry, but only for their own road-building use. They also had other ideas as to the use of the mountain. In the winter of 1959 and 60, they opened the Mount Tom ski area. It started with only 2 slopes and 1 chairlift. They continued to improve and expand the operation until at its end it had 17 ski slopes and 5 chairlifts. It was the O'Connells that brought the sport of skiing to our local area. From the very beginning, they provided snowmaking and night skiing. This picture shows both activities in action. Many local people were now able to ski a few hours after school or work and still get a good night's sleep. Expansion continued, and by 1977, the alpine slides were completed. This really turned the ski area into a year-round location. Although there were some minor scrapes and bruises, the slides grew in popularity. This is how the alpine slide appeared on the side of the mountain. We see its serpentine route going down the mountain. The alpine slides were followed by the water slides in 1981. We now had a complete summerside entertainment complex right here on our own backyard. In 1987, Summerside opened the wave pool. This picture does not do justice to the pool because during the weekend it would have been hard to see the water, much less get in it. There were so many people would be on this grassy slope that walking would also be a problem. But it was not to last. Several bad winters with little snow and the new water park at Six Flags in Agawam proved to be the demise of the ski area in Summerside. They reluctantly closed the entire operation in 1998. The quarry was still under lease agreement, but with great controversy it was closed several years later in 2000. In June of 2002, a new 10-year lease was signed with the Mount Tom Rock Company. This is how the quarry appeared in 2002. It was a very large hole in the ground. This is my car down at the far end of the quarry. Before the quarry was commercialized, the quarry trail from the reservation located right here would have crossed to the ski slope far above the quarry rim. Today there is a stop sign on the trail to prevent accidents. Here is another entity on a ski area property. It's on Dead Top Peak. It is the wind turbine generator built in 1993 by the engineering department at the University of Massachusetts. It says spent most of its years in this down or maintenance position. From here, though, one can judge better the great size and the length of propeller blades, each about 25 foot in length. The wind generator has been in this upright position for several years, but I do not believe it has turned or produced a kilowatt of electrical power since its installation. We are now down on Route 5 at the Dinosaur Footprint Park. These prints were discovered in 1836 by Professor Hitchcock of Amherst College, who thought he had discovered large bird tracks. The archaeological community argued many years before admitting the tracks were actually made by dinosaurs. The trustees of reservations purchased the property in 1936 to forever preserve the tracks. The tracks were made during the Triassic period. That's several 100 million years ago, when the rock they are now in was just mud. Speaking of dinosaurs, this concrete dinosaur stood along Route 5 in Smith Ferry from the 1930s through the 50s. Its only use was to advertise several Sinclair dinosaur gas stations, one in Mount Tom Junction, the other at the Gingerbread House at the top of Northampton Street in Holyoke. This is Toto's Restaurant on Route 5 in Smith's Ferry. It was a landmark restaurant for many, many years. Originally built in 1933 in the shape of a Zeppelin. It burned in 1934 and was again rebuilt as a Zeppelin, but burned again in 1938. This time it was rebuilt, but not as a Zeppelin. It burned again for the last time in 1960 and was never rebuilt. You know, 3 strikes and you're out. Today, all that is left of Toto's Restaurant is the old wishing well, and it remains well hidden in the brush alongside Route 5. This aerial view of Smith's Ferry was an area that once provided recreational entertainment for a huge number of area residents. There was O'Hara's and Worthington Groves, Kane and Calliope Beaches, Holyoke and Mount Tom Junction gun clubs. Along the river was numerous summer camps. It was just a fun place to spend the summer. But in 1950, Holyoke Water Power Company purchased the property, and today it is home of the Holyoke coal-fired power plant. When the power plant was completed, it would appear as we see it here. How is our mountain protected today? In 2000, the state purchased several hundred acres on Little Mount Tom from the Mountain Park people. Then in 2002, the ski area finally sold their property, with the reservation buying 114 acres along its border. The U.S. Fish and Game Department, here in yellow, purchased 140 acres. The trustees of reservations, here in pink, purchased 74 acres, and the Holyoke Boys and Girls Club, shown here in orange, purchased 22 acres. In closing this program, I would like to take a brief moment to thank you for watching. I would also like to invite you to take time to explore and enjoy the splendor of this beautiful and special mountain.